Our second speaker is Lee Crookes. Hang on, let me spotlight. Yeah, there he is. Lee is a uni teacher in the Department of Urban Studies and Planning at the University of Sheffield. Lee continues to suffer episodic feelings of imposter syndrome, but looks forward to a higher education sector where he can work alongside others who share his outlook.
It's a real privilege to be here today. I've not been able to attend all the sessions, but I've really enjoyed those that I've been able to get to, and the one this morning was really fascinating, and a lot of the things that I've been hearing, some of the things yesterday as well, really resonate with my experience, and a lot of common ground. And I think I'm going to be quite self-indulgent and talk about my story of getting into higher education, and as part of that, I'm an only child, but I feel like I found my brothers and sisters today and yesterday. And it's been really powerful. I'm going to try and share my screen. I've got quite a lot to say. I've got my 15 minutes of fame here, so I'm going to try and pack quite a lot in, but I will be making my slides available. I think I've had to think about it. What I've got to say is quite critical of the university where I work. It's a Russell Group university, and I think I'd say this of any Russell Group university potentially. It's just where I found myself working in my hometown, and I think there's something about being a working class academic and being a working class academic in your hometown that makes the experience even harder, greater, and more challenging. So I'll try and share my screen, but I hope this goes to plan. One of our own, being a working class hometown academic, Molly's already introduced me. What's in the name? Who's this person, Lee Crookes? This does some work that was done in The Guardian a few years ago, just for a bit of a laugh, I think. And it's sort of showing the names of the first names of FTSE 100 directors, prisoners, and Guardian staff. And you can see there that Lee is one of the top 30 names for prisoners back in 2013. So I could have ended up in prison. And also, when you look at this as well, Oxford undergraduates and footballers, I'm hearing footballers as well, but unfortunately my footballing prowess wasn't great. And with a name like Crookes as well, it's difficult to avoid certain connotations. I've never researched my family history, but there is a suburb of Sheffield called Crookes, so I'm hoping that's where my name comes from. Just to sort of be more self-indulgent even, I was born in 1970. I grew up in Sheffield very much. My sort of formative years were in the 1980s. If you can see, I love maps because I work in the Department of Urban Studies and Planning. I sort of grew up in this little village outside Sheffield called Mosborough. 5 miles from the centre of Sheffield. It's here. The university's here. My granddad worked at a mine here near a place called Killermarsh. My dad grew up here in a little mining village called Bayton. And just here you can see a place called Orgreave, and this picture is one of the things that happened at Orgreave. It was the main flashpoint during the 1984-5 miners' strike, and that you can see there's just about sort of 3 miles between me and Orgreave, and that when I was a 14-year-old lad, that was the thing that had the biggest impact on my life really. And in terms of the clash between the working class and the state and the police, and that's where my politics sort of really started to take off. Sheffield and South Yorkshire as well were controlled by left-wing councils and the left-wing South Yorkshire County Council, and that affected my understanding of the world as well, and it was very much challenging Thatcherism at the time. And the other part of this that's relevant, my dad was a fireman, and I'll come on to that in a minute, but my mum was actually working at the University of Sheffield back in the 1980s. She was a typist, and she worked in a department as one of the support staff. And one day she came home from a day at work, and this is what makes me quite sad, and I apologise here. And the professors had sat down with her, and basically because they must have finished their marking, they've got nothing better to do. And for their fun, they asked her to read some words aloud, some long words, and basically made fun of her. and that really impacted on me as a working class lad, and it has done ever since. So apologies. So this was where I grew up. This was in Mosborough. You can see there's a fire station there. There are 12 houses, and that was because there were two shifts, a night shift and a day shift, and that varied. And the firemen worked day shift and night shifts alternately. But everyone's dad was a fireman, and it was a fantastic collective community. And what I really developed from being there was a sense of we being. And Chris Allen is someone I met during my PhD, and he talks about ethical dispositions towards people's lives with others, and that's what I gained from growing up in Mosborough, and with my dad as a fireman. My dad had started out as a painter and decorator, became a fireman. He got one GC in woodwork, and a brilliant guy, and gave me a really strong set of values, as did my mum. So growing up in Sheffield, a city with a conscience but no ego, it's a working class city. It suffered mass unemployment in the 1980s as a result of deindustrialisation and Thatcherism. And the legacy of this is evident in some really stark inequalities in health. But for me, the really strong point of the city is a sense of fairness, of doing right by people, of self-deprecation and humility. There's a local star called John Lewis, Cole Brothers, as it's affectionately known in Sheffield, never knowingly undersold, but Sheffield is never knowingly oversold. And there's an economy of speech in Sheffield. You can't have long conversations in the steelworks, it's too loud and noisy. So we try and say things in very short, concise terms, and we can be a bit blunt in relation to that. So it's difficult being an academic and taking pages and pages to say a couple of sentences. But there's a glorious sense of humour in the city as well. A lot of hard graft, and it gave me my accent and a really strong set of working class values. And I often wonder if only the university could be more Sheffield, and I'll talk about that quite a bit. Our former Lord Mayor, Majid, was a brilliant guy, breath of fresh air. A couple of years ago, he had his own version of Sheffield's 10 Commandments. I'll just give you a few seconds to read that. I hope everyone's still with me. Sorry for breaking down a little bit there, but it's been an emotional and exhausting few weeks and a couple of days. So when I did get to my PhD in my 30s, I'd gone to Manchester to do politics. When I was in my 20s, I got working in local authorities after that. But I felt that I needed to do something more. My job wasn't really going anywhere, and I came to the idea of doing a PhD, and it was a difficult decision. We just had my daughter, and it was a big financial sacrifice, and it was a challenging time, but I felt the need to do it and to try and demonstrate that I was capable of doing it. And this question of who and what the university is for came to me very early, because my research was about housing regeneration projects in the north of England that involved the demolition of working class housing. And what I saw really troubled me, because there were a lot of researchers and academics there who were basically developing research that would lead to the justification and legitimation of demolition and gentrification. And having come from a working class background and the values that I'd sort of grown up with, it seemed appalling to me that university research was being in this way. And from then on, I sort of really came to the idea of trying to challenge that. I tick many of the widening participation boxes for the university in terms of being mature, in terms of my parents' class, in terms of coming from a low participation neighbourhood and a state school, and it provided that sort of periodic affirmation of the lie of meritocracy, the local lad done good. And I had this really strange sense of being an outsider in my hometown, that the University of Sheffield feels different from the rest of the city. And for a lot of people who've not had experience and engagement with higher education, it's off limits. It feels off limits because it feels quite like an elitist place on the hill. And for me, it created this uneasy feeling of in-betweenness, not being quite good enough. And in terms of doing my work and then becoming an academic at Sheffield, there's a lot of pressure to work harder than others, to try and feel useful as a working class person. This has come through generations, to try and demonstrate that you've been productive and useful, and that sort of weighs heavily on you as a working class academic. and also at the same time demonstrating your worth to others as part of that. And what I found as well, this sense of we being that I'd grown up with on that estate of 12 houses, that wasn't very apparent in the university. When I got talking to the porters, the catering staff, and the cleaners, it was people who were there for others, the sense of we being, but with a lot of the academics, it was very much about their own careers and their own sense of identity and self-importance. And I really missed that sense of and collegiality is some substitute for that, and there are good strong elements of that within my department and within the university, but it's not the same. So I'm just one of a handful of Sheffield-born academics in the Faculty of Social Science. Interestingly, there seem to be more in science and engineering, and I'd be interested in exploring why that is. You can't really have a class interpretation of specific mathematical formulae, I suppose. So I think there's something there in that's worth exploring. And then these hidden injuries of being a working class academic, the experience of everyday elitism, the feeling of not being clever enough or being insufficiently articulate, and the terror of peer review, of not being literary and not being able to write as well as my peers. As well, people outside the university said, "Oh, you don't sound like an academic, you sound just like me," which says so much in itself. And then some of the students' comments that I've seen on module evaluations, I didn't think I'd be taught by someone local, and really quite dismissive. And I think someone mentioned this morning, Learning to Labour by Paul Willis in the university. I think it's talked about learning to labour for working class young lads, basically, and how they ended up with low paid, low skilled jobs often, and often they messed around at school because school wasn't of interest to them, and it wasn't interesting enough for their interests and how they saw the world. And I think for me, what does that look like in a university? How do you learn to labour as a working class individual in a university? And that's often meant me acting the clown, trying to find humour in things, trying to puncture the formality of things, code switching and hybrid identity, all the things that other people have been talking about. And there's also a realisation from me that most of my colleagues could do their work pretty much anywhere. Sheffield's just a stopping off point along their career paths. They have elected belonging that Mike Savage has talked about. But for me, it means something very different. That's the view from my ivory tower. There's a big block of student flats in front of it now that are just in the process of being built. I hope I didn't leave my window open because there might be some nesting birds in there. I've not been back for some time since COVID-19 has taken off, but there it is. So what I come to here is who and what is a university for? And Sheffield's got an interesting history. There wasn't a university in Sheffield in 1903. So the city fathers, in terms of the big industrialists of the city at the time, they and others put together a campaign to try and fund a university, and they put flyers across all the workplaces in Sheffield, in the mines, in the steelworks, and in shops everywhere, to try and get ordinary people to support the idea of the university and to actually donate money, a penny, they're called the penny scholars, to try and set this up. And the good people of Sheffield and South Yorkshire donated to that, the pennies. They raised the equivalent of £40 million at the time. And number one on that list, if you see it, that flyer, the university will be for the people. So as someone who's grown up in Sheffield, this is really important to me. What does that mean? What did that mean? And what does it mean today? And this is a university building on campus at the moment. It's called the Information Commons. To actually access it, you have to be paying student tuition fees. And there's a no entry sign you'll see just outside it. So it's not actually that inclusive, and it's not a commons. So,
Lee, you've just got a few more minutes.
Okay, thanks.
I'm so sorry.
Okay, I'll crack on. Like I said, I'll make these available. So what does a civic university look like in the 21st century? Why don't more local people ask questions of us, make demands of us? Why can't we do world-class research and teaching on our doorstep? How do you create a university that's for the people in the early 21st century? So these are all things that I've been looking at in my research and in my teaching. I've seen precedents from elsewhere. This is Ira Harkavy, who's done work at UPenn in the US in terms of trying to get the university working much more with the people on the doorstep and the communities there. So all sorts of precedents here in terms of this kind of work, particularly in the US. ideas of service learning and some examples from here, and this development of anchor institutions, this idea, and I think someone this morning referred to magnet institutions, which I think is a better term, much better. So I've been involved in engaged learning projects at Sheffield, a mix of service learning, action research, that's collaborative, reciprocal, it's not extractive, and it's got mutually beneficial outcomes for local partners and students. And I think as well, don't underestimate the impact that we have on students through our teaching. We've got a responsibility to civilise middle class students and get them to care, because they end up in a lot of professional jobs that involve working with working class people, and we need to try and develop their empathy and care. And Attlee and Beveridge both went to a settlement house in East London, Toynbee House, and they got that experience of working with working class people, and the welfare state came from that, as Attlee attests there in that slide. So being local, very quickly, I'll show very soon. Different relationship with the city, research and teaching. You feel compelled to do even more to make the university work for the city. It's the beast at our back with all these requests, papers, grants, and also this weight of the city on our shoulders. Strong commitment to reclaiming the civic role, commitment to making the university more Sheffield, and valuing the local. It gives you a different form of cultural capital and an authenticity that's potentially a very dangerous thing when institutional politics come into view. And just my beloved Sheffield United, the local football team, they're doing the best they have done in about 50 years, in the history really. And those two guys there, both working class Sheffield lads, the manager, Billy Sharp, the top goal scorer, and a real connection with the fans because of that. And they're doing the best they've ever done. What if university leadership involved ordinary working class people who had a strong connection with their hometown, and that could have a much stronger connection with people in the community, and it would be our university rather than the university. So conclusion, a bit more Sheffield. University is often always about making people become more middle class because that's somehow seen as better. Well, fuck that. What would a working class university look like? It's value driven, it's of the people, by the people, for the people, locally focused, locally accountable, engaged, not aloof, caring, compassionate, inclusive, homely, neighbourly. And Lou Mycroft, brilliant yesterday, joyous, cool, filled with creativity, energy, accents and solidarity. We being rather than me being, it's unstoppable, it's irreverent, it's irrepressible, it's unconventional, just like this conference. It's life-changing, a world-changing thing of beauty. So as a start, I'm trying to develop a working class student staff association and getting external people in to govern what we do in engaged learning. Don't listen to those that say you can't, listen to the ones that say you can, but don't get impaled on those spikes while you're doing it. So that's, I'll stop sharing. Sorry for taking up so much time.
Lee, don't be sorry. Thank you so much for sharing that. And I think I share everybody's sentiment when I say that those academics who spoke to your mum and treated your mum like that are a group of wankers. But thank you so much for sharing, and it's really brave of you. And I think you're the 5th person to make me cry today. So thanks. But
thanks, Molly.
There are quite a few questions for you in the Q&A, and I didn't quite get the chance to look at them because I was listening to you. But if you want to have a look while the others are speaking, and then we'll come back to you at the end. But I can't thank you enough for sharing that and for telling us about your experience.
Thanks, Molly.